probably not a little surprising that the audience drops off a bit, because some people get confused when you ask the question, academics and data. But we're not going to answer that question today, but we do have two folks here who are going to give us some very good talk around democratization of data. And this is an important idea in Europe. It's an important idea in this country. We don't tend to talk about it as much. So we're looking for some guidance at this point. Let me introduce to you guys Christine Lagarde, who has been not just a speaker here, but a promoter of the event. She has hosted this event in Switzerland. You had a couple hundred people, I think, that came to that. As you've heard from Rich this morning, he's putting out these things that are happening around the world. And that's one of the ways we will continue to get people. So you've done a great job of pulling in people to this environment and helping to bring them together around this. Christine's a professor of information systems in the Faculty of Business at the University of Lausanne in Switzerland. That's an awful place to have to get stationed. Let me say that completely sarcastically so that you understand what I'm saying. It's a wonderful place. All right, so if you get a chance to go visit, I'm sure they'd like to hear you from there. And Hippolyte,
right.
Okay, is a newly minted or almost newly minted doctoral student who has been working with Christine on some of this research. It's really important that we get the universities involved, and I'm just going to urge you all to get involved with your local university. Almost every university in the world has something called an academic advisory board. And that's where we in the ivory tower go talk to industry to see if what we're producing, the products, are suitable for them. And if not, we get feedback and make some adjustments. They can ask me till the cows come home. They care about what you think. So if you have a chance, please do get involved with an academic advisory board on this in here. Hippolyte has actually got a fair amount of expertise in working with various different ERP and software packages. So again, not a fresh student out of school, but in this case, an industry person who's come back to learn some, contribute. And we're looking forward to your session on the 5 pillars of data democratization.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, and let me quickly start, and then Hippolyte will take over for all the details about digital native companies and incumbents also, and how they approach data democratization. Before starting, a couple of words on the background.
If that works.
Yes?
Yes.
Oh,
no,
no.
I want to be too far.
We actually are far too, well. No, it was just, I think, slide 5 or so. A little bit of background. So actually, it was already said by Peter. So we are located in Lausanne in Switzerland. So there are 3 important cities in Switzerland that all start with L and have a lake, Lausanne, Lugano. And we are in the French-speaking part, 50 kilometers away from Geneva. And it's a great place for universities. We have a lot of different polytechnical universities, business schools, IMD as an executive education place. So if you want to visit, it's not only for the view, but also for the academic environment that we have. And so it was already said that, yeah, academia, industry should work together. We actually have a very long experience with that. So we are both working in the Competence Center Corporate Data Quality. That's an industry-funded research consortium with 20 multinationals, mostly European-based multinationals. And what we are doing, we try to actually facilitate the creation of knowledge around data management. And it's also a pleasure to have Boris Otto here in the audience, who actually was the co-founder with me when we still were at St. Gallen at the business school. And in the meantime, we have, since 2006, also more than 17 years of experience, similar a little bit to the event here. And also the community here, that was basically an inspiration also to start with data quality related topics. So what we're going to discuss here are experiences and content that we have created together with these companies, because they were interested. European companies are very much interested in how to actually scale data and analytics in the organizations, and the term is data democratization. So this is a little bit like, okay, our consortium. The companies are probably multinational companies that you know. The logos are small, but Nestle, for instance, Bosch, Bayer, BASF. So it's typically large companies with a lot of legacy, a lot of physical topics that want to somehow also move into the data and analytics world and have obviously the question, so how can you do that, and to what extent are practices that are being used by Airbnb, Uber and others also transferable to this environment. We are actually very active, so it's an active expert community that we're working with. We share a lot of knowledge and we do research and co-innovation. So every year we have 3 different topics around in the competence center, and we work at the moment on scaling data governance, but in the last 2 years we worked on data democratization. Data products at the moment is also a hot topic, and data management for sustainability. So, and typically it's a researcher, a team of researchers that treats this topic. So that's a little bit for the background. Where do we stand in data analytics? So Randy Bean unfortunately cannot be here because he's in the next door session. And, but we all know the report that actually shows increasing progress on becoming data-driven, returns on data and AI investments that actually increased a lot. So we are not here to motivate or create awareness, but we are today actually trying to make all of this change happen and realizing also the benefits that we could possibly gain from data and AI. What is very clear in these reports every year, in the last years, there are big achievements on the investment side and ROI, but on the other hand, if you look into data-driven culture, if you look into managing data as an asset or creating a data-driven organization, we are far from what most companies would actually expect that we are. So still a lot to do for all of us, which is nice, and there's a lot that we can do also at the intersection between or in collaboration between academia and also industry. So I have a quote here from Tom Redman, who also is at this conference, and it's actually this quote about regular people, so those who do not have data in their titles, and that are very important in any data project or program. And you may have also read this article from Harvard Business Review, where he makes the point that we need these regular people in different roles. They provide the problems that we should work on. They provide the data understanding so that data scientists don't just invent something or work with flaws in the data or bad data. But they are also important because they will be the ones that need to put these findings into practice. And so the big question is, so how can we somehow cross this divide or make them and integrate them into the environment? And this is what we mean also by data democratization. And with that, actually, I hand over to Hippolyte, who will show us a little bit the research that we have been doing around digital natives and the different practices they use for data democratization. And at the end, we're going to come back and also reflect that based on the analysis of data democratization initiatives in more traditional firms. And there's also Paul up. So if you are on the WUWA app, you can actually also provide your input where you stand, what aspects actually of data democratization are relevant for you.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. So I think we've seen a bit of motivation, so how to make basically more people to work with data, and especially these regular people that typically have not been involved, but should be involved because they definitely have some business inputs to put into these different data analytics projects. So obviously that was a motivation for our consortium, which basically include mostly incumbents, so traditional companies. But actually when we did also our research, what we've seen is the struggle is actually also happening at more digital native companies. And here you see a few quotes that we collected from these companies through different case studies. So for instance, Airbnb says, well, in order to inform every decisions with data, it wouldn't be possible to have a data scientist in every room. So how do we deal with that? Uber, for instance, says, well, we need to basically fuel our data-driven decisions. And for this, we need to democratize data so that teams at Uber can utilize it well, regardless of their level of technical skills. And you see it's a bit of the same issue at Spotify, for instance, but more also on how do we make sure that when we share insights, when we share, for instance, data products or results of an analytical process, that it's actually shared to the good recipients, for instance, so that you don't avoid any redundancy of analysis, but also making sure that there is proper documentations for these regular people to actually understand what happened. So the question for us was, well, these different companies have been involved into this democratization initiative and actually have communicated about it on different posts, blogs, keynotes for the past 10 years. So obviously they were a bit ahead on that regard compared to more traditional companies. So the idea for us was try to understand, well, what can we learn from the data democratization initiative? And then this would allow us to basically try to see how we can basically face that to what our companies in our consortium actually are facing as challenges. Oh, which button is it? Yes. So maybe to come back to this term of data democratization, I think Peter said it's not regularly used. And actually, there are a few articles from, I think, Tom Davenport, but also Tom Redman that actually came out a few weeks or months ago. So we see actually the term growing somehow. And for us, he was also trying to collect different inputs and try to understand what it means. And if you actually collect different feedbacks from practitioners, they have a different understanding of what it means. So the first step for us was to actually collect an understanding of what data democratization implies. And we did this analogy with, say, politics somehow. And most companies now are at a stage of data aristocracy. So most of the data powers and data responsibilities are actually in the hand of what you can call a data elite, so typically data experts. And these regular employees that we discussed don't have much responsibilities with data. And what you want to do is actually move to a data democracy and basically involve this whole pyramid, so these regular employees, into data-related tasks. Obviously, this comes not only with, I would say, different data possibilities for these regular peoples, but it comes also with certain responsibilities and duties for these regular people. For instance, making sure that you use data appropriately, that you actually follow compliance guidelines, that you actually make sure that you are involved into data quality, for instance, as a data creator. So this comes not only with rights, but also duties, and this we needed to also specify that. So we came up with a working definition on data democratization, which was trying to be somehow as simple as possible, but also trying to make sure that we reflect all the, I would say, challenges that can also happen. So basically, we say that data democratization is the enterprise capability to motivate and empower a wider range of employees. So note here that we don't say all employees, but we'll discuss that afterwards. So not just data experts to understand, find, access, use, and share data in a secure and compliant way, of course. So this is following this definition that we have worked on this topic. Now, a quick preview of what we're going to discuss and go into more details afterwards. And this is also the title of this presentation. It's the 5 pillars of data democratization. So the idea for us was to come up in collaboration with our partner companies to some kind of framework that companies can use when they actually try to democratize their data. So it's not some kind of project you can set up. This can be embedded into your data governance program. It can be embedded at a project level. But this should be somehow all the 5 strategies or considerations you should have when you work with data, or at least try to engage with more of these regular people. So the first pillar is actually broaden data access. So this is obvious, and when you ask people about data democratization, they'll tell you it's just about opening the gates. And it's not that easy, obviously. There are more challenges than that. Obviously, if you open data access, how can you make sure that actually these new people accessing the data can actually work with it? And there are different challenges, making sure that, for instance, they find the data and use it in a simple way, so you can also enable self-service. Obviously, you need to train them, so level up data literacy. Making sure that actually they have this exchange of best practices, exchange of knowledge across different groups, across domains, for instance. And here we have noticed how data communities actually contribute and are actually super helpful to connect different groups in the companies. And finally, promote data value. So that's more like the marketing side of it, and actually quite critical when you want to build that data culture eventually. So we are going to go through, I would say, some examples from these digital native companies that we have mentioned before, so Uber, Airbnb, and Spotify, and try to see how they tackled each of them, so with a few examples. So let's start with Airbnb. I mean, obviously everyone knows Airbnb. Huge growth in the past few years. You see even on this top left chart how their valuation is actually, twice higher than these big hotel chains, and probably Hyatt is in there. So even this hotel, for instance, obviously valuation is huge, and the surge on the websites and bookings on the websites obviously created this huge amount of data that not only required the company to scale their infrastructure, but also a lot of challenges coming with that. And I think it's also mentioned in that quote on the top, as Airbnb grows, so do the challenges around the volume, complexity, and obscurity of data. Information and people become siloed, which necessitates navigating an invisible landscape of tribal knowledge. Tribal knowledge here means basically knowledge is stuck into different teams, right? And typically not shared beyond a single team, which obviously is a problem of cooperation between teams, but also when someone leaves the company, the knowledge is not properly documented and shared accordingly, which creates some further issues. So how did they do? Well, it's a combination of factors they have used with the following vision. Every employee should be empowered to make data-informed decisions. And they wanted to get rid of this tribal knowledge. And so how did they do it? Well, first, data access. And here you see a set of, I would say, tools they have used. So single source of truth, revision of access permissions, increased data documentation, and improved data and tools request process. So this is, I would say, quite common. But they also put a lot of effort on data education. So focusing on problem solving with data, how to actually enable more people to code a bit. So how to trigger a bit some queries, so SQL, for instance. Investments in visualization, but generally how people should actually think and I would say create hypotheses. So it's really like not only just taking classes, as we will see later, but also very much diving into the problems in cooperations with experts. And finally, data tools, so a broad range of tools that have been set up. So we'll see example of a few of them afterwards. So AirPal, data portal, which is a sort of data catalog. Knowledge repo, again, we'll see that examples. But all the tools that would facilitate this productivity, also making sure these tools are easy enough for these new people to work with data. So let's start with this data portal, which could be similar to the data catalog somehow. So this is about, as they say, empower Airbnb employees to be data informed by aiding with data exploration, discovery, and trusts. And I think what is nice in this example is how they represented the whole company ecosystem as a graph. So here, in the tool, you basically find, obviously, dataset documented, but how do they actually relate to different teams? Which employees actually are currently using the dataset, so that if you have any question, for instance, you have an expert that is currently working on the datasets to find the answer. So the whole ecosystem, so data tables, dashboards, reports, user teams, even business outcomes are mapped in the ecosystem so that you really find what you need in an easy manner. So the connection reflects relationships, so consumption, production, association, and basically you can also find very easily lines of communication if you need to contact someone relevant for your work. So it's an enhanced and tailor-made data catalog in that sense. And we'll see that actually this happens very much at these digital natives afterwards. The next step for them was to set up this, what they call knowledge repo for repository. And here the idea was to make sure that an insight uncovered by one person is actually transferred to the whole company. So get rid of this tribal knowledge again. So how did they do it? Well, they have this platform where every single analysis is documented, but not only documented, it's actually reviewed in the sense of peer review, like academia, and you see that quote at the bottom. The process combines the code review of engineering with the peer review of academia, so making sure that every single analysis coming out is reviewed, obviously for quality assurance, but also for documentation purpose for ease of reuse. So here it's about making sure that every single analysis is explained, contacts are provided, everything you need to know about the analysis, even to reproduce it later, is documented for the benefits of its regular people, but not only, even for these data experts, etc. Now, obviously, when you scale data use to regular people, data literacy is one of the main challenges. And here we have set up this internal academy with specific curricula for personas and role families. And again, we'll see a pattern in these different personas and role families, and we'll again discuss that for other companies. But our main insight here is that companies really divide their audience into different personas to train fast and efficiently. But basically, how did we do it? It's not only just bringing regular classes, so classroom videos, for instance, webinars, but as you see in this quote, for instance, 30 volunteers from data science and engineering actually went and trained different teams, so acting as teachers in a way for these regular people. And you see that the curriculum actually covers 3 personas. So you have Daphne Data. So they say it's the technical data power user, the epitome of tribal knowledge. Manager male, so less data literate, but needs to be able to actually, doing this managerial stuff. And that's a new, so either a new employee or someone new to data. So 3 personas here with curriculum matched to it. So you see again 3 level. So first level is data awareness. So here it's about introduction to, well, why is data so important? What does it mean to be data-driven? Introduction to statistics and data resources. The next level is a bit more advanced. How to do queries, how to use the platforms we have discussed before. And the last level is probably more for these advanced, data experts. So for more like technologies related to analytics, but also more advanced coding classes. So at Airbnb, the interesting part is really like most of the curricula is actually taught by the experts themselves. So that, the problems are really connected to the company itself, are not just generic classes that you would find in a company. Now we'll move to examples at Uber and continue a bit of the discussion. Well, Uber, it's a bit of the same idea. Huge growth in the past few years. Obviously, fast-growing platforms with Uber Eats, Uber Freight, Uber Drive, whatever. So huge data collection per day. So they say they store hundreds of petabytes in multiple data centers. I think at the end of the day, the challenge is summarized on the bottom right. Rapid growth means growing pains. So they actually specify that accessing data and services was complicated, and especially collaboration was difficult, because growth means you hire many people very fast, and you have actually struggle onboarding them and making them collaborate with existing employees. So what it mean for Uber? Again, coming back to these personas, it started there. They actually established, I think they call it chain of reliance. And here it's about making sure that we identify proper personas that actually build upon each other. So if you start on the left, you see here Reliant Rebecca. Typical role would be marketing managers or general managers, so more on the business side. And these people just need to be able to make business-related decisions based on simple insights they are provided. And for this, they need to rely on these insights provided by monitoring Matt, for instance, providing the spreadsheets or the dashboards. And typically, that would be more local managers reporting to Reliant Rebecca. And then more advanced analysis would be provided by analyst Aina. In here, it's a bit more advanced. You need to be able to do some basic coding, for instance, limited Python and R, do some queries, so a bit more knowledge here on the coding side. And finally, obviously, these data experts, again, at the end of the chain, building the machine learning models and probably providing the most advanced products here to support, for instance, forecasting or any other advanced analysis. So you see, again, some, I would say, connection with the personas at Airbnb. And here what's interesting is, again, this initiative around data discovery and data accessibility. So we have seen the example at Airbnb. Again, Uber used a bit of the same idea. They have Databook, which is basically a metadata management hub. And here it's about making sure that anyone finds what they need. And obviously, they need a lot of metadata. And they have a few principles for the platform, again, designed internally. So it's not something they buy from a provider. I have to slow down, apparently. Yeah. Do I? And a few principles, such as extensibility. So for instance, new metadata, storage, and entities are easy to add. Accessibility, so services can access all metadata pragmatically. Scalability, so support for high throughput. It's hard to read as a French, to be honest. And finally, power across data centers, read and write. So here you see that even a bit more advanced, you have already embedded visualization in the platform itself. So when actually people find table, they already have insights generated directly in the platform. Continuing on this Uber case, how do you actually stimulate self-service here? So they have done this platform, which is called the Data Science Workbench. And it's a bit related to what we've seen at Airbnb before. So they say it centralizes everything needed to perform data exploration, data preparation, ad hoc analysis, model exploration, workflow scheduling, dashboarding. So everything you need to be able to provide as analytics outputs in a single pane, web-based graphical user interface. And I think I like very much what's their principles, again, in the bottom right. So the platform is built for the experts, designed for the less technical people. So really encouraging regular people to actually make the extra efforts to actually learn and practice, especially. And the platform encourages people to actually not stop at building what's known, but also empower people to look for the unknown. And what is also interesting is how the platform creates communities with both data scientists and non-data scientists. So here it's about collaborating on projects. So you have even functionalities, for instance, for asking questions to an expert. When you try and learn on the platform, do an experimentation, you can call an expert, tag an expert to actually help you. And obviously the platform supports you into finding the right experts for you. So some of the features include, different tools. There is no manual setup required. For instance, you have already prepared Jupyter notebooks for people to try and learn. You have, obviously, full integration with Uber's infrastructure. And as I said, collaboration and knowledge sharing features. So typically, again, calling an expert, collaborating on a project, creating a new project, finding the relevant people to collaborate on. And here you see an example of technologies they use, Spark, RStudio, Jupyter, etc. The third example is Spotify, and Spotify is actually interesting because the motivation, obviously, is somehow close. Again, digital natives have this huge increase of data collected, but here it's a bit different because it's not only about onboarding regular people, but it's about also solving challenges that the data experts themselves face with working with other experts. So I think it's interesting because it shows that data democratization obviously tries to scale to regular people, but also trying to solve the pain points that exist within data experts themselves. So a bit of background, mainly focused around what they call lexicon at Spotify. So again, a platform to facilitate data discovery for data scientists specifically. So 2016, Spotify moved to Google Cloud Platform, leading to an explosion of data set creation. And obviously, this leads to a drastic increase of hiring of insight specialists. And what happens is data sets like clear ownership and documentation, making it difficult to find, even among experts themselves. So what did they do? They actually released Lexicon, so a sort of library for data and insights as a solution of the problem, at least a first tentative. That was in 2017. And the idea was to basically facilitate the discovery and browsing available data sets. And actually, they say despite 75% of data scientists using it regularly, data discovery actually remained a major point of pain. So it was really time consuming because it was mostly just a simple library, metadata hub in a way. And they wanted to actually facilitate, as you will see later, and how they've done it, to facilitate how you actually find the relevant data set for you specifically. So overall, need to improve data discovery experience. And actually, they say the typical data scientist at Spotify works with 25 to 30 different data sets in a month. And if data discovery is time consuming, well, obviously, it increases the time to produce the insights. So how did they solve that? They actually updated Lexicon with new features, which actually maps expertise to data sets. So when you actually search for data sets, you will find the most relevant experts currently working or having worked on the data sets. So for instance, you see for this data set called here. So you have this employee, and you see the different teams that are mapped to different data sets. And here it's about, sorry, I have to come back here because it's a bit hard to read. So it's about mapping teams to the different data sets so that you actually know who is currently working on. And here it's about making sure that you have, for instance, description of names, owners, descriptions, but also usage statistics. So you see, for instance, the most used data sets, which should also give you a hint on, well, which are maybe the most interesting data sets to work on or the most trendy in the company, but also information on a data lifecycle, an overview of the most used schema fields in the table, so a few more informations. So that was the first thing, how to map really teams and experts to, I would say, the most skilled experts on a certain data sets on the platform. And you see that for specific experts, you can actually filter the different data sets they are working on. And you see that at the top of the image. Now, it's about also helping users get started with the data sets they have discovered. So, okay, you have found the data sets you need. What do you need to do? Well, you need maybe sometimes more information. So in addition to basic metadata, you have consumption statistics at the schema field level. So you can even get more information on even the fields of each data set, how they've been consumed. You can also find users can find even more information on all the recent queries on the data sets. And even find information on which tables are actually connected to other data sets. So for instance, which tables have been used in conjunction with another data sets in a specific use case, again, to make sure you can reuse that information properly. So again, trying to not only help people finding the relevant data sets, but also making sure they have all the latest information in terms of number of queries, most trendy data sets, for instance, and obviously relevant experts to help you if you need to start on a specific data set. The last example, and not the least important, I would say even clearly important one, is, I would say, not digital native specific. And here we have summarized all the examples we have collected from not only our partner companies, but you see also an example at Netflix here. It's the need for companies to really promote data through various corporate communication channels. So we have seen technical-oriented examples before. We have seen platforms for facilitating collaboration, for instance. But at the end of the day, you need to also making sure that, well, sometimes even force the data values somehow. So let me start maybe with this example on the top left. First, you need to leverage your experts. We have seen examples at AirBnB, but also Uber does it. Leverage your experts to actually train your people, usually in complementing more formal classes or introduction class. Usually people get when they actually onboard in the company. And here you see the example of a data scientist at Uber on the top left actually training on a specific data set relevant to the team in the room. Then you have, for instance, this example on Netflix job website, which is a bit more into enforcing the data spirit or data values. And it's a bit small for you guys, but basically it says in highlighted bullet point, it says, well, you are good at using data to inform your intuition. If you don't basically comply with that, you basically are let go. So you have really to embrace this data mindset. And it's actually on the job of a career website, so that when you actually apply, you know what's expected from you. Again, in tandem with marketing, you have to raise awareness and showcase your successes. So examples we have seen, especially at more traditional companies, newsletter are quite a big thing. So you showcase success and you try to communicate it to the whole company. We see also some of our partner companies using podcasts, but you can also find many more examples. For instance, data conferences, either to showcase success directly from the data people, but also invite some of the business people to actually showcase also what they have achieved. And the last one is also very important is, well, if you give new responsibilities to regular people who have not been used to actually having these responsibilities, how do you actually make sure you reward performance? So you also may have to think of how you integrate that into HR stuff on performance management, how to actually reward, and it can be, obviously through the HR system, but also, for instance, inviting these people to showcase their success in front of everyone, for instance, in these conferences we have mentioned. In any case, we have to be pragmatic. These people take new responsibilities, so they need to be somehow rewarded if you want them to really sustain their engagement. So that was a bit the overview. So again, 5 pillars: broadening data access, which is, I would say, the most expected one. And interestingly, when we search again for this definition at the beginning of our research, most of the definition on even data enablement, data democratization, was really about just making sure we have access. But what we found is really it's not sufficient. And again, we have 4 more pillars that needs to be considered. So you can even consider that as a framework for you guys to take away at home and see how you can actually map your own initiatives to this. So at project level, at team level, even at company level. So for instance, we have some of our partner companies who that actually set up a proper data democratization initiative, for instance, as part of a data strategy. So again, you can consider this at different levels, but at some point, even if you deal with data governance, you will again find these ones at some point. So yeah, that was it for me. If you want to add something, Christine.
Exactly. I will just perhaps comment, because there was a question also in the chat for the session about the definition of data democratization, and you see it again here. So there was no definition, and what was actually very interesting, data democratization is discussed in other areas than our typical data field. But for instance, I think they were in building and construction, so basically in remote disciplines where they had to actually work with data, there was some mentioning of it. So the definition that we came actually up with is it's an enterprise's capability to motivate and empower a wide range of employees. Hippolyte mentioned that, not just the data experts, to understand, find, access, use and share data, and then there's an addition in a secure and compliant way. That was actually the perspective from the companies that we work with that are very much concerned, especially in Europe, about obviously GDPR, about data protection, privacy regulations that you have, and also IP-related topics. So if you are, I don't know, a German engineering company, obviously, or you're a pharmaceutical company from the UK, sharing data always bears the risk of also having infringements, obviously. So I would like to summarize a little bit the 5 pillars, and actually there is a poll out. If you have not filled it up yet, you can perhaps also check that. So if you have initiatives ongoing, so which of these pillars have you been actually tackling? And we hope, so from previous presentations in our executive education programs, we know a little bit like where the most activities are going on, but we can compare that later. So unfortunately, the slides, I know they're a little bit difficult to read, but I will try to actually go through that and summarize. So the first pillar that we have been seeing is broaden data access. And here the challenge is that data often is in silos and not accessible. And we all have heard that many times, that eventually it takes a long time to go through these request processes, or at least to see what is out there. So the strategies that we have been seeing in the digital native firms were different ones, most metadata management, for instance, so that people can browse. Increasingly, we see also data marketplaces out there, and the examples that you can also look up. Most of the time, there are really also nice podcasts or videos or blog posts around their data portal, Data Hub, Metacart, Data Book, and so on. So this is really still one of the key areas. But as mentioned, that has to be somehow complemented by the increasing data use by non-experts, so that you basically avoid the bottlenecks in the central teams. And I think that's also what we see at the moment with the data mesh idea, that you basically try to centralize through the promotion of self-service tools. What is interesting here, if you look at AirBnB, the knowledge repo, but also Uber Data Science Workbench, that it's not only basically self-service tools, but it's also the knowledge. So it's documentation around use cases, making use cases more accessible so that someone else could basically use them. And especially in large organizations where you have, I don't know, country-specific operations, for instance, or different functions in different sites, that's also a way to scale. So if you have a good practice or some team that has done a very interesting use case, basically it could be used by many others, obviously. Then the data literacy part, very important one. We have seen that, of course, I mean, we expect that a lot of people should work with data, but they are not data literate at all. Some of them are scared, others are excited. It depends very much. And who the use of these personas that are very much basically taking a little bit into account the context, the previous knowledge, but also the level of data literacy that is required from the employees. The training programs can actually be personalized to a certain way. And at the moment, we see that in Europe a lot in the large companies that they have set up academies or different, let's say, training programs that start with awareness, that go into foundational courses, but also integrate the situated learning. And the situated learning means oftentimes basically bringing people in the room, really working on something, doing projects together. So it's a different type of learning, obviously, than just having, I don't know, a webcast or something like that. And peer-to-peer coaching, data universities obviously go into that one. Fourth pillar, and this is also some of the research actually that we have been doing, is around data communities. So since we have typically people that are spread in the organization that somehow feel isolated or that also see that the data practices are not yet developed, we have to find some ways of actually bringing them together and develop also the data practices that are perhaps not out there. And these data communities, actually, they are typically around a shared domain of interest. A shared domain of interest may be a functional domain, maybe marketing or operations or finance, but it could be also around a tool. I don't know, we have the self-service BI experts or the citizen data scientists that use a certain platform. Or it could be, I don't know, master data management community, for instance. But really, if you want to scale, we have to use these informal mechanisms because we will never have reporting lines or CDOs that have enough power to basically address all these people in one reporting line. So we have to work with these informal mechanisms. And the last one is actually the promotion of data value. So obviously, since many employees do not necessarily have confidence, it is important to communicate a lot, to raise awareness, and then also to create these ambassadors, be it on top management level, but also on the functional or local level to advocate for data. And you see that also at Uber, the data champions, for instance. You obviously have that also in many of the more legacy-oriented companies, that they basically try to create coalitions of the willing or experts, basically, that would help them. So this is a little bit like the overarching picture of the 5 pillars. If you look a little bit, what is the difference between incumbents and digital natives? And the digital natives are on the bottom, and the incumbents are on top. We actually see, and we have done some studies, so also the more traditional companies obviously address typically in data democratization initiatives the 5 pillars. But what we see as different, so for instance, when we look at broaden data access and stimulate use of data, we see that the more traditional companies, they are much more, let's say...
conservative.
Sorry?
Conservative.
Conservative, yes, let's call it that way. They are careful, actually, with granting access. So they're like thinking about, okay, how do we actually ensure that only authorized people will basically be able to access? So whereas in the DNA of the born digitals, they just would say, okay, yes, let's try this out, and let's just give everybody basically the tools that he or she needs. So there's this compliant and secure use of data. oftentimes then this will actually mean then that concretely you have this data request processes where somebody, I don't know, data steward, data owners are basically then also enabling or granting access and taking somehow the responsibility that only the people that are allowed to view that data will get it, for instance. But generally speaking, I mean, you have all these data catalog initiatives, you have data marketplaces. There's also, I think, a lot that has been achieved also in the last months, years on this side. Then, if it comes to level up data literacy and also creating data communities, what we see in the Born Digitals, they expect that people are data literate. They hire people that are data literate. We have seen the Netflix example. It's basically in there, and they expect that their young hires also work directly with the tools. In the incumbent situation, we have more this optional training, so you can do something if you want to somehow qualify. But we see also increasingly that there are really large communities. I don't know how many big data conferences I saw last year or this year also happening in all of the large European companies, be it Lufthansa, be it Volkswagen, be it Siemens, be it automotive suppliers. So a lot of them basically try to foster and create these communities and thereby basically create this transformation. And then promotion of data value. This is something we think it's more important for an incumbents that they show exactly how data plays into the core value proposition of the company, if it's not a driver for changing business models. And at the moment, so we are running a series of interviews, and it's very interesting. 2 or 3 years ago, we run the same survey, and there, like, the digital transformation was a big driver. And these days, it's clear. So it's really like data access. So this is, I think, one of the achievements that has been also there, that there is a higher degree of awareness. But obviously, it's not in the DNA of all the more traditional companies. So this is a little bit like the overview of the 5 pillars. Actually, I have, unfortunately, we cannot show the poll, so I have to look it up a little bit here in the...
Maybe in the meantime, here you see a few publications. So if you want these publications, of course, we can share them. So you see on the right, for instance, this work report that actually documents a bit of these findings. But we also, for instance, have publications on data communities, data analytics communities, and how they actually, work together in the company, how they cross together on different projects, for instance. So we can also share that with you. Maybe a few more examples also on data literacy. I think one of our partner companies said to us, well, we just use e-learnings from LinkedIn because we have this partnership and it's free somehow. So we pragmatically use what we have. So we see also, and this is also a study that is ongoing with our partners, is companies actually trying to set up, again, as we said, more situated learning or workplace-specific learnings. So spending less time on classes and webinars, just using them mainly for introducing the topics and the strategies or statistics class. So, but I think usually we have this 10 to 90 kind of 10%, 90% ratio. So 10% formal classes and 90% really specific to the business context or the workplace.
I can very quickly, look at the answers. So we have 45 answers, and Broaden data access is 26, stimulate data use with self-service is 23, so roughly a little bit more than 50%. Level up data literacy is more in the scope, actually, of so it's 27, but it's still relatively similar, and we still get answers. Creating data communities is the one pillar that is less developed here, and promote data value actually is very high, so rather high, actually higher than we have seen typically in the, I don't know whether this is mentality or whatever, but we have oftentimes this is a little bit like the forgotten piece that we see. So with that, I think we were a little bit fast in the beginning, so we got a little bit of complaints. But so we can perhaps go back to the 5 pillars and have also questions in the audience. So we can.
yell at me for not being on camera. So a couple questions about democratization of data. Tony, you're an aspiring PhD student, right? Exactly. Hang on, let me get the microphone to you, sir. And I'm an incumbent, so go for it.
So I have a lot of questions on this, and I really love this research and finding. I think it's very insightful, and I think part of me really wants to like jump in and do everything that I'm seeing on the screen. Right? So I guess from the incumbent perspective, right? How do you get to? Because I saw a lot of the inherent value in the KPIs around, like the utilization of these capabilities that you're putting out there. But for an organization that, where you have a lot of people that are doing value-added work, and to get them to stop and participate in a community, or to even, in the past, not my current role, but I've done this self-service thing where we built it, and then I had a whole bunch of people being like, wait a minute, you want us to start building our own reports now, right? There's kind of a mindset change there. So how do you quantify the value? How do you sell democratization in and of itself to senior leadership? And how do you measure the value of that in outcomes and, from an incumbent perspective, right?
That's probably the larger topic of also how to create value and how to foster a data-driven way of working.
Right.
And I mean, obviously there are different ways to do it. So, and coming back to this initial study from Randy Bean and New Vantage, actually I think our job has been a little bit easier in the last 1 or 2 years because there's a lot of acknowledgement generally, or awareness that data brings some value. So I think, and that's different than it was 3, 4, 5 years ago. I completely subscribe to that. But now it's basically on creating these data practices, and could mean, for instance, yes, we need to, I don't know, share or like create our dashboards ourselves, and it's not some central team that does it in a way. But I think I would be going a little bit further, and a way to actually do that can be to reflect also what you want to do with these dashboards. So which are the decisions that you want to support, or what are the changes also in the way you operate. And I have seen that also in smaller firms in executive education that we have been working with, that they used strategically the implementation of, it was Tableau, I think, or but could be any other self-service BI tool, and really accompanied like the organization in this rollout, where they basically were discussing, so what are the dashboards that would inform marketing or that would inform finance and so on, and really work together with the people that are supposed to read, to use them, but also to create them, and then had, I don't know, some town halls where they would, I don't know, showcase the nicest reports and so on. So I think there are different strategies that are possible, and you need to find, I don't know, a business initiative or a tool or something that you can basically hook into so that you can drive a little bit of, or create a certain dynamics.
Great. And just go ahead.
If I may add to that, because we just lived through it. Yeah, thank you. We just lived through it, so I Is it on now?
No.
No? It says on. Oh, there you go. You can hear me?
No, but not the online.
Go
Yeah.
ahead, try to.
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, okay.
No.
So, I mean, the way we've done it, we're in a bank and we've done this data transformation, and the first thing they were saying, why do you want to give me more work? You
Right.
know, in the past, you've always built those reports for us. Why are we doing this now? I think the first thing you need to tackle is what's in it for me, for them. Basically. You have to tell them what's in it for them. And it's a different recipe for each unit.
Yeah.
Some people are suffering because they're waiting for the data, and now you're not going to wait for it. Some people are suffering because they want more access, but they can't. So it's not a one solution fits all. It depends on the pain of that department, and just focus on that pain. And you got to be good in sales too, in order to do that.
And I think what is very important, so you have different maturity levels, definitely. And it's not necessarily the departments that you think are the most advanced that are necessarily the most advanced. But what I found quite interesting, so we had also someone in executive education who took this pyramid that we saw from the data aristocracy. Sorry, it's very European probably as a concept where you have, I don't know, the kings and the the dukes or whatever owning and having access to the data. But in some companies it's really like that, more traditional ones where I don't know, report only goes to the board and is prepared with a lot of work. And what they did is really like segmenting. So I mean, we will not go to everybody in the first stage, but we have actually different groups that we address with the specific also use cases, pains, and so on they have. And the segmentation, I think, of your pyramid. So if you think of that, okay, this is my entire population that I could possibly address, but I have to do some smart moves on who would be the first one. And it can be, and here I would really recommend that, really also working with these different groups to find out the maturity level, their pains. Do they have an access problem? Do they have a use problem? Do they have a literacy problem? This is something that you can find out in a structured way if you want to.
Christine, just a quick related follow-up question. I won't hog the Q&A here, but who are these companies hiring to lead these initiatives, right? So, you know, the educational piece of literacy or the community management piece on the data, like those are different skill sets than we say have in a financial services company or within a data management team.
Yeah, but right? I mean, in the end, it's the data teams that somehow get new roles. So for enablement, I mean, we saw that if you have followed the previous session with Tom Davenport, he said, okay, governance is, I don't know, perhaps not the right word, but enablement.
It's in my job title now.
Yeah, and and I think we have seen that also in the companies that we work with. In former times, they did not have people that would set up newsletter and communicate, but now they have teams to actually, do also a lot of outreach and awareness campaigns, and they think in net promoter scores and whatsoever. So it's classical marketing also for data that we see. So communication roles. And for the data literacy.
So I think it's interesting because it's not only like just asking people to do this. Sometimes we had examples, for instance, of communities emerging from very formal interactions. So I remember we had members of our community of companies. One of his company had regular pizza lunch on master data management, and one day they just asked for sponsorship, and then it became a regular community. So and then it expands. So sometimes it's just emerged by itself. And on data literacy, sometimes you have to find some champions, obviously. And
but there's HR, obviously. I mean, the HR people also have to somehow think about what would be the next trainings in a catalog. And then it oftentimes goes, obviously, there is some funding for initiatives for the companies that are really very active. They typically have funding for building up data teams that are larger. And if you have less funding, probably you have to then size your activities according to budget. But there is informal aspects into that, I think, that are quite important. And this is really the network part to a certain extent, and also the literacy part.
Thank you for the presentation first, and then I love the accent. I have two questions. One is the every pillar. If you have pillars, you have to, climb.
Right. Yeah.
So is there a study or a continuance of coming up with a framework for the maturity level? That's one. And then the second is I haven't seen the level of investments those three companies have made. Correct, to do that work, because it's very difficult to achieve those five at the same time. So I'll be very curious what you found out.
I can start very quickly. So first of all, it doesn't need to be all at the same time. You can start with different magnitude for each of them. And obviously, there is a resource difference between these companies. So obviously, they have to prioritize. So that's the first thing. And the other question was the maturity. So actually, we worked on a set of metrics for each of these pillars. So obviously, it's always
But not on the investments, to be
on the
very
investments,
honest.
no. But for instance, on the consumption side, so when you deal with the first pillar of broader data access, so you can see, for instance, your increase of requests on the data catalogs, improve time to actually access the data, literacy. You can find net promoter scores for your trainings. So we also worked on a set of metrics for each of these pillars, but not on the investment side.
Yeah, so the investment side, honestly, if you want to share your investments and also how much you got out, more than happy to actually have this discussion. But for us, it's extremely also difficult to get it. Probably the consultancies then are better off because they see the project and initiatives budget. We can actually see a lot what works or what doesn't work. But typically, we don't have so much access to the financial data. But very valid question.
We have time for just one more.
Hello. So I'm coming from a perspective of a student researcher. I'm currently doing research in multimodal generative AI. And my question is whether corporation or enterprise is the correct perspective to democratize data, in the sense that a lot of the obstacles that I face as a researcher is really just, do I have the data? And for generative AI, do I have the computation power? A lot of the skills I have or learn, I just self-learn, going to communities, going to meetups. I meet a lot of data scientists or senior data engineers that would teach me a lot of different skills. And to the extent where they start teaching me the core mathematics to a neural network and how to do them in paper and pencil. So then it goes back to the question, is solving democratization of data via enterprise is the correct way forward?
Yeah, so but you are, in our logic, you would be a data expert. You are among the ones that have the privilege to actually work with data, and you also have the motivation to do it. But here we talk a lot about people that are accountants, that are marketing specialists, and so on, who would actually need to work with data, but who are not, they have different job profiles, and some of them will be very excited to work with data analytics, and they will also follow the same path as you, like go to meetups, go to whatever they can actually find about resources. But if we have, I don't know, a German automotive company with hundreds of thousands of employees, and many of them in, I don't know, in plant maintenance or in the operations part, they are all excited. Typically, these are engineers, they are skilled, but you have a lot of people where you also have to discuss what is the level that they actually would need, also in terms of data skills. But as we know, it comes with right and obligation. So also the secretary or the assistant that captures some of the information needs to know, obviously, that there's a need to perhaps enter high quality data. So there's also different specific entry level of data literacy. And this is why what we see, this awareness programs are typically very broad and almost going to the level that, for instance, in an onboarding in a company, you have some data aspects. So for privacy, obviously, for some regulatory. But coming back to your question with generative AI, I think we have a huge boost also for democratization that we have not really thought about when we were actually submitting this proposal here to the conference, because that was somewhere, I think, in December.
We closed the proposals in December.
Yeah, but ex post, I would say that's the biggest driver for democratization, and probably erases also all the questions about what the skill set is to use it properly, what the data is that you want to train and leverage this on. So in a way, you have probably also the different pillars that come into play.
So I think we have no more time left for this, but we do have some more questions. I'm sure you guys will be sticking around to work with that. Let's thank them for a really great presentation. And I want to just give you a baseline. There was a paper in ISIS, which is sort of the major academic system, from a couple of years ago, and it was based on